With Europe and Japan playing with negative interest rates, the Fed has begun preparing for the inevitable, even as they previously raised rates. The Fed's dominant role in the financial industry would cause a domino effect with all other central banks should they reverse policy and dip into the negative. Banks have gone bankrupt a long time ago, and the fraud of maximum levels of debt will eventually crumble this system and bring it to its knees. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Today, we're going to talk about the Fed, of course, among other things. Let's begin with this right here, and we're talking about capital controls. The German government is considering introducing a limit of 5,000 euros on cash transactions in an effort to combat money laundering and financing of terrorism. So, for one, of course, there is some legitimacy to this. You don't want to have these activities taking place, the money changing hands in areas they might not want. I completely agree with this in principle. However, you as an individual put your money in the bank and all of a sudden you can't take it out. That seems to me like they're withholding your assets. But of course, as soon as you put your money in the banking system, it becomes theirs. You can read the details if you'd like to, but essentially I just want to show you, and consistently, as I cover here on the channel all the time, because this type of thing, restrictions have taken place in many countries. I've shown you here, and it's going to get worse. Capital controls are in fact increasing, and they'll use excuses like terrorism in order to make it acceptable. That's the way they do this, and it's working quite well. As interest rates turn negative around the world, the Federal Reserve is asking banks to consider the possibility of the same thing happening in the US. Remember, this hasn't actually taken place yet, but they're just going ahead and testing. So in its annual stress test for 2016, the Fed said it will assess the resilience of big banks to a number of possible situations. The severely adverse scenario is characterized by a severe global recession, accompanied by a period of heightened corporate financial stress and negative yields for short-term U.S. Treasury securities. So basically, this stress test that they're doing is what we will certainly face. Think about that. A severe global recession, call it a collapse, call it a crash, call it a recession, call it a depression, whatever. And you have corporate financial stress, where the corporations are indebted. Perhaps their stocks have declined significantly. And then you just add the negative yields on the short-term U.S. Treasury securities. So we only have one component that we haven't faced already in previous years. And what would happen? Well, of course, the Federal Reserve will be there to save the day. Then they've made so many excuses, so much lying to the mainstream media, and therefore to the public, stating that don't worry because, they can't bail out the big banks again. We made a law. Of course, we've never seen them break a law before. That's great. Let's move on here. Swiss bank UBS saw its shares slide on Tuesday on news that investors had pulled billions out of its division serving wealthy clients, a token of the market turbulence that has shaken the world in the past few months. It's not just UBS, but we're seeing, as I covered in the previous video, major corporations laying off some of their staff. And we see this taking hold not just in one part of the US or on the continent, and it's all over the world. And this is a policy being applied by corporations. As soon as they suffer with their shareholders, they do whatever it takes. They lay people off or they create new methods in order to get more profit. It's all about profit. This UBS happens to be one of the first banks claiming to have some major issues here. Let's move on to this, what I wrote about in my book. Debt will collapse an empire regardless of how large it is. If you want proof, look at the history of the ancient Greeks, Romans, and all of the others who thought they could defy the natural forces of the market. In my book, I talked about this specifically because consistently I read about how somehow the current empires that we have today, perhaps we'll use the US empire as an example, that nothing could ever change that it's going to be the empire forever and ever. But that's just not the way it is. Historically, there has never been an empire which has lasted forever. It would be around today still. So we have the situation where people are in denial, whether it's normalcy bias or anything. It doesn't matter. Things are going to change. Since the robots are able to move faster, we're talking here about an article out of Tech Insider, and basically they're, well, just to put it bluntly, replacing a lot of jobs. Since they're able to move faster than humans without tiring, Welty says the system will boost warehouse productivity by up to 800%. They'll also be not be subject to human error, which means they can get the order right nearly every time. In this article, they also talk about the fact that they work 24 hours a day. They don't take breaks. They don't need any sort of basic essential that a human being would. And this is very, very frightening, because a corporation needs to worry about their corporate profits. And if all of a sudden they find a way, whether it costs them, let's say, $100,000, well, why not put the money down? They can convince their shareholders that they need to put a little bit of money in today, and tomorrow they'll lay off a whole bunch of people, and they will be for that. This right here, just a quick little note from the Financial Times. We're talking about the Chancellor, Ms. Merkel, repeatedly said, if the euro fails, Europe fails. And the reason I mention this is simply because we always have the blame game happening. So if you're going to let the euro fail, if you're going to let the EU fail, well, then all of Europe is to blame for that. Everyone should be helping out. Everyone should be doing their part. So it's the blame game. And this happens in the financial industry specifically as well. And there's no reason to do this, but this is the way politics work. This is very interesting. Speaking of Ms. Merkel, we have the retired media boss at a major German state broadcaster admitted his network and others take orders from the government on what and what not to report. And listen to this line. He said journalists received instructions to write news that would be, quote, to Ms. Merkel's liking. The mainstream media is a complete propaganda arm for the government, for those in control. If you believe that you are getting truth from the mainstream media, you got something else coming. That doesn't mean that every single thing in the mainstream media is false. That's not the case. But their opinion, the way that they're trying to direct you towards information and keep your eyes away from other pieces of information is intentional. It's not free media. Absolutely not. Some appear more free than others, but the truth is they're not at all. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. When you give me a thumbs up, it helps to push the videos up to a higher ranking in YouTube. So I really do appreciate all of those. Last but not least, if you found the video informative, you'll definitely find my book, The Money GPS, even more informative. If you head over to Amazon, they have this look inside feature, which allows you to flip through the pages of the book and see if you like it. Take care.